Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. This is LL3's newest podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful, swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date, Sunday, July 30th, 2017. It's around 3:15 a.m. in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, kicking back along the New River. Trains came by, pretty quiet. We hear some music in the background, which is across from me. Yeah, I decided to do another show earlier this time. A couple of things I had to pick my brain, and mainly it's going to be a couple of articles that came from Newsbud.com, and they are exclusive. So, to be very sincere, you may have to, I'll put those footnotes up, but you have to be a member to actually read it. So, it'd be something that'd be worth it. Trust me, I am a Newsbud's member, newsbuds.com. You can leave the footnotes, just click the link to newsbuds.com. You can be a member, see what else they got. And trust me, you won't be disappointed because they're very fair. They're people funded, no sugar daddies, no partisan politics, just across the board. Temple Emmons and many others are on there. Trust me, they're very good. And you can be educated too at the same time instead of some used car sales pitch rhetoric. So there'll be a couple here. And this one came out yesterday, to be exact, and it's by Kurt Nemo. It's titled "Divide and Conquer: Why the Decision to End the CIA's Covert Plan in Syria is Irrelevant." So we have to listen what Kurt Nemo has to say in his synopsis. And as it reads here, on July 19th, the established media reported Trump has decided to put an end to the CIA's covert support for jihadists in Syria, attempting to oust President Bashar al-Assad. The program was reportedly put into place by the Obama administration in 2013. Excuse me here. It was reported earlier that Trump had made a decision to shutter the program after meeting with the CIA director and national security advisor prior to a July 7th meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. Special Operations Commander Tony Thomas confirmed Trump's decision on July 21st, at least from what I know about that program and a decision to end it. Absolutely not a sop to the Russians, Thomas said at the Aspen Security Forum, an annual gathering of establishment insiders discussing national security. It was, I think, based on the assessment of the nature of the program, what we're trying to accomplish, the viability going forward. Tough decision, Thomas said. Thomas then walked back his remark, saying he was merely referring to reporting to the announced shutdown of the program. On July 24th, Trump added further confusion when he tweeted that the Amazon Washington Post, a reference to Amazon founder Jeffrey Bezos' purchase of the Post, has fabricated the facts on my ending massive, dangerous, and wasteful spending to Syrian rebels fighting Assad. Later the same day, Trump tweeted that story about him, published at the Post, are little more than fake news, and the newspaper is bad as ratings challenged CNN. CNN had reported the CIA program to train and arm moderate psych rebels was never going to tip the balance in the Syria civil war, and represented a giveaway to Putin and Russia. The flailing network also noted that the U.S. military is continuing to support the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, a cobbled-together alliance of Kurdish, Arab, Assyrian, Armenian, Turkmen, and Circassian militias. The Kurdish People's Protection Units (YPG) is its political arm, the Democratic Union Party, stand accused of ethnic cleansing of Arabs and Turkmen, and the destruction of their homes and property. According to reports, CIA and U.S. Special Forces program announced in September 2013 by Obama was an unmitigated disaster It said the agency trained and armed a 50-man insurgent element in Jordan and that they had been inserted into Syria. The pretext was disputed chemical attack blamed on the al-Assad government. In September 2015, Pentagon trained rebels from Division 30 led Angus Obaid turned over the weapons to al-Nusra and after entering the country. Prior to this, in July 2015, al-Nusra jihadists kidnapped the commanders of a U.S.-trained rebel faction operation in the northern Syria. Abductions have only added to mounting doubts about the program, which aims to forge a so-called moderate rebel force capable of taking on ISIL forces, the Telegraph reported. As noted by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh and others, the CIA has facilitated the flow of arms from Libya to Syria in collaboration with the UK, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. The operation was based at the CIA compound in Benghazi, where Ambassador Christopher Stevens and others were killed by members of Ansar al-Sharia on September 11, 2012. The existence of a CIA training equipped program dubbed Timber Sycamore, based outside of the King Faisal Air Base at Al Jafar in southern Jordan, was exposed after 3 Green Berets were killed on November 4, 2016. The Jordanian security forces, the operation was supported by Arab intelligence services, most notably that of Saudi Arabia. Despite recent revelations of the program, it remains classified. Details about the program remain unknown, including the total amount of support, the amount and type of weapons transferred, the amount of training provided, the types of U.S. trainers involved, and the jihadi groups supported. Earlier this month, after reports surfaced on the deaths of the Green Berets, officials and the Timber Sycamore would be phased out. The alleged termination of the CIA's program supporting jihadists in Syria is irrelevant to the endgame effort to unseat al-Assad. Soon after taking office, Trump discussed with top aides the idea of creating safe zones in Syria, which he had mentioned during his campaign. Framed as a humanitarian gesture, the safe zone plan represented an effort to carve up Syria and isolate the al-Assad government. In May, Russia, Turkey, and Iran agreed on the Astana plan to establish a de-escalation zones in Syria, de facto partition of the country into areas of influence, primarily in northwest Idlib province, Homs province in the west, and East Gous, the suburb of the capital Damascus, and southern Syria. The agreement was not signed by al-Assad and quietly shifts the conflict from one between the regime and the opposition rebel groups to one between powerful foreign nations that have sent their armed forces proxies into the country, notes the Jerusalem Post. Turkey has already carved out a zone of influence between Jarbulus and Kilis in northern Syria, and also supports jihadi groups such as Falaki al-Sham, aka Sham Legion, also known as the Homs Legion, an alliance of Wahhabi jihadists previously affiliated with the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood. In 2014, Sham Legion was vetted by the U.S. to receive BGM-71 TOW anti-tank missiles. In May, the United States and Britain began negotiations with Russia to establish a southern buffer zone, possibly with Jordanian boots on the ground. Control of the South will either lead to a potential U.S.-supported buffer zone or the presence of Iranian-backed forces right on the doorstep of the main regional foe and Washington's biggest Middle East ally, Israel, the Financial Times reported. This is heading toward partition, and the last thing foreign powers are listening is to what the Syrian people want, said Hassan Hamada, a U.S.-backed rebel commander in northern Syria. Additionally, the Kurds have worked to establish Rojava, a de facto autonomous region encompassing the cantons of Afrin, Jazeera, Kobani, and adjacent areas in Shabaa region of northern Syria. Moreover, Israel is working with Syria's Druze community to carve out areas along the Golan frontier. In June, a heavy fighting raged between the Syrian government and the Lebanon Liberation Committee, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, in the Quneitra province in Syria's south, located in the Golan Heights under Syrian control. Syria accuses Israel of working with the Levant Liberation Committee, formerly al-Nusra. Israel has conducted airstrikes against Syrian military in the region and has occupied approximately 7% of the Golan Heights since the 1967 Middle East War. In May, Russia President Vladimir Putin said Trump supports the idea of establishing zones of influence in Syria. We spoke about this with Mr. Trump yesterday. As far as I understood, the American administration supports these ideas, Putin said after talks with Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Black Sea resort of Sashi. There's a new development here. Erdogan said after a meeting with Putin, I will be defending the idea of safe zones everywhere. To move to the balkanized Syria and marginalize and eventually displace Bashar Harks and backs to plans formulated by Bush neocons. In 2006, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said during a press conference at the State Department in response to Israel's invasion of Lebanon, what we're seeing here in regards to the destruction of Lebanon and the Israeli attack on Lebanon, in a sense, is the birth pangs of a new Middle East. And whatever we do, meaning the United States, has to be certain that we're pushing forward to the new Middle East and not going back to the old one. It sounds like the Greater Israel Project, allegedly speaking, right? Something to think about that, my friends. The plan to divvy up the Middle East was further formulated by Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters in June 2006 along supposed humanitarian lines, accepting that international statecraft has never developed effective tools short of war for readjusting faulty borders. A mental effort to grasp the Middle East's organic frontiers nonetheless helps us understand the extent of the difficulties we face and we will continue to face. We're dealing with colossal man-made deformities, and that will not stop generating hatred and violence until they are corrected. Peter wrote in an article titled Blood Borders, How a Better Middle East Would Look, published by the Air Force Journal. Efforts has a parallel to the Balkans and Central Eastern Europe during the years prior to the First World War. After the war, borders were redrawn with the effect of creating ethnic conflict, and that ultimately resulted in another devastating world war. Then, as now, the effort was orchestrated by foreign interests, primarily driven by the Wall Street banking interests, redrawing and partition of the Middle East from the eastern Mediterranean shores of Lebanon and Syria to Anatolia, which is Asia Minor, Arabia, the Persian Gulf, and the Iranian Plateau responds to broad economic, strategic, and military objectives which are part of long-standing Anglo-American and Israeli agenda in the region, writes Bahi Daris Nazmorea. Interesting there because, like we said before, my friends, this is totally insane. So technically it's not relevant. They could probably stop the program, but others will just follow through. Something to really look at, something to think about, and it makes a lot of sense because they still find a way of trying to conquer Syria and just split it up for the dismantle of al-Assad's government. So, interesting there for sure, because one thing you gotta look at, my friends, is a lot more complex than what it is. But they can put their oil pipelines in there with those areas that are gonna try to divide up the zones and take advantage of some of the natural resources. Something to really let sink in. Part of the New World Order agenda, to be exact. So, next one here. Another Newsbud exclusive. And this one is entitled, After Nuland, Wise Mitchell nominated to direct the U.S. European and Eurasian Affairs. It is by Professor Philip Kosovic. Very good. A very good reporter, Russian accent and all that. So he may sound a little dorky to some folks, but the man has great knowledge in these areas in the geopolitical field. So I'm not mocking him by any means. Saying it all in good faith. All right. When the Assistant U.S. Secretary of State of European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland, resigned her position on January 20th, 2017, all those who want to see the return to a more stable political order in Europe and decline of Russophobia or criminalia, as I call it, breathed a sigh of relief. She was perceived as mainly as the main political instigator of the whole series of covert efforts to remove and replace top European government officials who did not critically accept the principles of Anglo-American geopolitics. Nuland was best known publicly for involvement in the Kyiv coup against the legitimately elected government of the President Viktor Yanukovych. At that time, she was secretly recorded directing the personal makeup of the future Ukrainian government, while infamously at one point referring to the European Union with an expletive. I have written extensively on Nuland's intellectual and professional biography and specifically focused on her imperial pro-council activities in the Balkans. In my article, Victoria Nuland and the Balkans, published by BFP in April 2015, at the time it seemed as if Nuland was on the sure path to become the next U.S. Secretary of State because a Democrat, i.e., her longtime ally Hillary Clinton, was greatly favored to win the presidency. And I know she was just trying to really manifest on ruling Ukraine to make Zbigniew Brzezinski real proud. Any questions? Check out the Grand Chessboard. And I will continue on here. What this did not happen, and Donald Trump won instead. The hope was that Nuland's position in the State Department would be filled by someone less Russophobic and aggressive toward the legitimate security interests of Europe's eastern neighbor, Russia. So many times during the presidential campaign, after he got elected president, Trump stated he supported a dialogue and cooperation with Russia. However, his choice for Nuland's successor shows that he either did not really mean what he was saying, or that he was forced to act contrary to his original intentions by the powerful forces of the status quo, which some have described as the deep state. Enter A. Wess Mitchell. On July 20th, 2017, Trump White House announced the nomination of A. Wess Mitchell for the position of the Secretary of State of European and Eurasian Affairs. The U.S. Public Relations Propaganda Service, Radio Free Europe, described Mitchell as an expert on NATO and transatlantic relations, in which in reality is a code phrase for someone who is a NATO ideologue, a strong advocate for Anglo-American geopolitics, and an enthusiastic anti-Russian lobbyist. It was noted that Mitchell was a founder and president of a Washington, D.C. think tank, innocuously called the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA. Generally speaking, the more formal and bland-sounding the name of the organization, the more subversive things it deals with. One, for instance, recalls the CIA's decorated a plan, the brain center of the U.S. most lethal covert operations from the 1950s and 1970s. Indeed, after carefully analyzing the CEPA website, I have concluded, though it marketed itself as a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy institute, CEPA is a front organization for the U.S. military-industrial complex. Its major funder, including Lockheed Martin Corporation, Raytheon Company, Bell Helicopters, Textron Systems, and BAE Systems. In addition to the U.S. Departments of State and Defense, U.S. Mission to NATO, NATO Public Diplomacy Division, and U.S. Postgraduate School. Other CEPA funding comes from a variety of foundations, most of which purvey the globalist mentality of the U.S. as the world's policeman. Moreover, CEPA is also financially supported by several organizations rooted in the Russian-phobic political and economic interests of the ruling European Eastern European political elites such as Baltic American Freedom Foundation, International Vice Guard Fund, American Friends of the Czech Republic, Hungary Initiative Foundations, and the Friends of Slovakia. For these elites, Russophobia is a convenient domestic policy propaganda mechanism to divert the minds of their populations from failing economy, rising unemployment and crime, and declining the quality of healthcare and education systems. No wonder that SIPA has an office in Warsaw, Poland as well. After considering who the funders are, the professional intellectual references of the staff make sense. On its payroll, SIPA has two of the most Russophobic present-day commentators on European affairs. Edward Lucas, also a senior editor of the British news weekly The Economist and the author of several books on Russia pervaded by the mentality of the Cold War, is employed as a senior vice president. Janusz Bugaski, one of the masterminds of the Balkan NATO expansion occupation strategy, a prolific author of NATO propaganda and a powerful agent to Atlanticist influence in Eastern Europe, is a senior fellow. In their hostile treatment of Russia, Mitchell's own publications do not fall much behind those of Lucas and Bogaski. Together with his SIPA colleague, Jakub Grigiel, another professional Russophobe, Mitchell co-authored a book, The Unquiet Frontier, published by Princeton University Press in 2016. The book is essentially a sequel to Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard. I might have to read that book. Interesting. The Unquiet Frontier. I might have to recheck that book out. Working out its anti-Russia, anti-Iran, and anti-China dimensions in the current geographical context. This is a particularly ironic considering that Brzezinski himself abandoned this line of thought in his most recent books, realizing the extremely dangerous, if not apocalyptic consequences that the pursuits of policies he had called for in the Grand Chessboard could have for world peace and for the world peace in general. Still, it appears that Brzezinski had links with SIPA because he is quoted on his website saying SIPA's innovative work on the Central and Eastern Europe region contributes significantly to the transatlantic debate. I am proud to be associated with this unique institute. What is so innovative about Russophobia, which is one of the most gruesome products of the 18th and 19th century Western political thought, is left unexplained. Certain key insights of the unquiet frontier, particularly as it relates to the current state of the U.S.-Russia relations, are summarized in Mitchell's article, Make NATO Great Again, published in February 2017. Oh my goodness. Let the imperialism roll on, right? Absolutely. Okay, so on this Make NATO Great Again, the very title of this article, Mitchell, now a Trump nominee, subverts the very meaning of the centerpiece of Trump's presidential campaign, Make America Great Again. NATO is a military alliance of 29 countries, and its function requires that the U.S. sometimes subordinates its own national interests to the interests of other nation states, most of which they have different social and historical trajectories from the U.S. This is precisely what Trump said the U.S. should never do. Trump, it is America first. For Mitchell, however, it is NATO first, even if other NATO member states are treating the U.S. and its military as the servants of their own national interests. In fact, with NATO itself, Mitchell extols the example of its most Russophobic member states, the Baltic states and Poland, and tries to present their national security interests as perceived by the present political elites, but perceived quite differently in some other periods of these countries' histories, as completely identical with the U.S. national security interests. This is extremely dangerous and irresponsible. The historical relations between these countries and Russia are much more complex than the good versus evil simplistic way that the professional Russophobes describe them. In the last 25 years, the Russophobes have become quite sophisticated in falsifying the whole episode of the Eastern European nation to make it fall in line with the needs of present-day anti-Atlanticist ideology. For example, the Red Army, which has liberated the Baltic states and Poland from the Nazis at a horrendous cost of hundreds of thousands of dead and wounded, is now portrayed as a brutal occupying force. Does this mean that perhaps some Russophobes would have preferred that these states remained under the Nazi occupation? If one follows the logic of their arguments and begins looking at historical alternatives, it certainly seems like that. In addition, the links between NATO and former Nazi officers are well documented by historians. For Mitchell, NATO's controversial origins and decades-long subversive practices, including violation of international law and the U.S. Constitution, are not problematic at all. He sees NATO as an embodiment of the Western civilizational construct, facing off what are presumably the barbarians from the East. He wants NATO to grow and expand. The most dramatic aspect of his grand plans for NATO is the call for relocation of the U.S. military bases and tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers to Poland, and probably to the Baltic states as well. Needless to say, this would add fuel to the fire in an already extremely tense military standoff in Eastern Europe. At the same time, it will bring billions of dollars in profits to the U.S. military-industrial complex, which, as I have shown, the largest funder of Mitchell's SIPA. In addition, it would also strengthen the increasingly unstable alliances regimes in Poland and the Baltic states against their more progressive and peace-oriented opponents. Not surprisingly, Mitchell's effort to promote the interests of these regimes did not go unrecognized and unrewarded. Recently, he held high-level meetings with the Lithuanian Foreign Minister Linas Lankevičius. Okay, I hope I pronounced that person's name right. And Defense Minister Raimundas Karoblis in Vilnius, and the Polish Foreign Minister was told Wasikowski in Warsaw. Obviously, these officials, known for their intense Russophobia, will be Mitchell's closest partners once he gets approved by the U.S. Senate, which, judging from the senator's attitude toward Russia, is a sure thing. Conclusion. While placing U.S. troops and military equipment closer to the Russian borders is a win-win situation for Mitchell and his donors, it portends grave dangers for the rest of the world, including both the United States and Russian populations. It sets the U.S. and Russia on a near-certain collision course and catastrophic consequences. It means permanent instability in Eastern Europe, increased militarization and police brutality, perpetual surveillance and spying, and ultimately more conflicts and war. It also means the victory of the warmongering oligarchs and the defeat of ordinary people in their dreams and aspirations. Furthermore, it means that Trump deceived his voters when he promised to clean the swamp. And in fact, with the nomination of Mitchell and others who share Mitchell's ideological profile, Trump is adding to it. And there's footnotes in here as well. You can see this for yourselves. But be a subscriber, make your own judgment, and all that. And you can pick up The Unquiet Frontier as well. Amazon.com, other places. I'm going to check that book out. I'm real itching to read it now. Because I read The Grand Chessboard, and it is, like I told people, after I read that book, I despise Theodore Brzezinski a lot more. And in my past episode, I told it like it is how I felt about that SOB, and I'll just leave it at that. But one thing that's why individuals like Congressman Ron Paul said it's time to bring our troops home. We don't need imperialism because it will blow back in our faces. We all know, too, realize the CIA is behind this as well. Coverts and try to blame it on Russia, and it's not really working. And I'm not here to worship Putin or be a Putin sympathizer by any means, but you have to always look at the bigger picture. This is how I see things. And if you're going to tangle with Russia, especially in the wintertime, they know their turf. It's like, if any foreign countries come here, we know our turf. they're going to have a problem. The opposition is going to have a problem, and we don't want to see that happening at all. We don't want to see it be benefit to oligarchs, the one world order, etc. And we all know about Nuland. She's just another globalist parasite, as far as I'm concerned. And this guy Mitchell, the U.S. Senate needs to shoot him down. So anyone in the United States, urge you folks to say, shoot this SOB down. We don't need any warmongering demonods. Plain and simple, okay? All right, my friends, that's all. That's why I only did a couple of these episodes. That's all. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or you say something that's interesting, you may want to check out. Whatever you do, please address your correspondence with decorum. Keep me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Tumblr, YouTube, Freedoms Network, Scene.life, Minds.com, FutureDeath.club, or Patreon.com/LokiLuck3, which is 3 eyes all together. If you want to be a patron, do your donations, that'd be fantastic. Furthermore, you can email me at LokiLuck3@gmail.com or LokiLuck03 at ProtonMail.com for those encrypted fans or supporters, okay? All right, my friends, once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.